Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 1843 and today's date is April 16th, 2019, and the title of the episode is The World is Starting to Notice They Are Exposed. Now, we know that Robert Mueller has been investigating Donald Trump for over 2 years now and has concluded that there is no case to answer on his colluding with Russia during his election campaign. Given that news, you would expect the markets to have soared. Instead, they've reacted by tanking, and there's nothing the markets hate more than political uncertainty. Now is not a good time to be fully committed to stocks. Gold has rallied along with silver this year, and it might be time to think about putting some of your money into precious metals. If you call Noble Gold, you can speak to one of their advisors about the pros and cons of buying precious metals. So click the link below to get your free gold IRA guide, or just call 877-646-5347 and make sure to mention X22 Report to get the free gold investment guide. Let's get into the economic collapse financial news. Now, the whole part of this entire plan is to expose the central bank for what they are. That they're not a benefit to the people, they're not working in the people's best interests, and they're on this planet to enslave the people, enslave the countries, and feed the deep state. And we're going to be talking about how the central banks now, well, it looks like people are starting to notice, and people are starting to question what they are doing. But first, let's start off with Trump's tax cuts right now, because despite 66% of Americans getting this cut, only 20% believe their taxes were lowered. Now, yesterday, Trump tweeted out that, yes, the New York Times, they acknowledged that there were tax cuts, and the vast majority of people, they did get a tax cut. And now there's data to back this up. And a lot of people really didn't realize what was going on because the mainstream media was out there, and they've been pushing this agenda for a very long time that these tax cuts, they were terrible, people were going to lose their jobs, people were going to die, and there were 9 apocalyptic lies that were fed to the American people about this tax bill. And here are a few of the most outrageous examples of fear-mongering. 10,000 people will be killed every year. Now, this came from the economist and former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers, who wrote in the Washington Post op-ed that the conclusion would follow that the tax bill would result in 10,000 extra deaths per year. And he explained why he thought the bill was very dangerous. When people lose health insurance, they're less likely to get preventative care. They're more likely to defer health care they need. And ultimately, they're more likely to die, he said. Number 2, the tax bill is akin to rape. Bruce Bartlett, a writer and former Treasury official, said the bill would not create a single job, that Republicans want the poor to pay more taxes to force them to work more, and that the bill is really akin to rape. Well, we know number 1. Number 2, completely false. Number 3, Armageddon, the worst legislation ever considered by Congress. Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, who was the minority leader at the time the bill was passed, said the tax reform bill was the worst bill in the history of the United States Congress. Number 4, grad students will have to quit doctorate programs. When graduate students were told their tuition waivers for working as teaching assistants and researchers would become taxable, they calculated that their taxes would increase by 61%. And guess what? Wrong again. Number 5, America is dead. Now, Kurt Eichenwald tweeted out the following: America died tonight. Economic suicide adopted to feed the insatiable greed of donors who have been refusing to dole out dollars to GOP until they got their tax cuts. Voters fooled by propaganda and tribal hatred. Number 6, Republicans want to kick the poor middle class in the face. Washington Post columnist Catherine Rampell described the ways Republicans are using higher taxes to plan to punish the poor and middle class. Number 7, most people are getting bigger paychecks. Here's why that's bad. Rick Newman at Yahoo Finance wrote about a looming tax surprise in 2018 without ever explaining why giving the government a smaller interest-free loan with every paycheck might be better than a fat refund. Number 8, New Yorkers allege all Americans will suffer. The day before the tax bill was signed in December 2017, protesters staged a die-in on Wall Street near the New York Stock Exchange. One protester laying on the ground held a sign in the shape of a gravestone that read, "Rest in peace, tax scam helped the rich, not me." Number 9, an endless global recession. We are very probably looking at a global recession with no end in sight, wrote New York Times columnist Paul Krugman. I suppose we could get lucky somehow, but on economics, as on everything else, a terrible thing has just happened. Now, if you can see that all of these things have not come true, even though they're out there pushing fear. Think about the Brexit now. What are the central bankers, what are the deep state, what have they been doing out there? They've been pushing fear so the people don't vote for the Brexit, so the people don't push the EU out of the country. And you can see this is what the central bankers, the deep state do. Every time they tell you that it's bad, it's actually good. If they're pushing something and they're telling you how great it is, it's usually the opposite. It's really bad. Just like when they said, don't worry, coming off the gold standard is going to be great for you. Don't worry, giving us control of your fiat system is going to be great for you. Don't worry, all this is good for you. Not for us, but for you. And you can see it's the actual opposite. Just like with gold and silver. When they tell you, oh, gold and silver, it's not even worth it. It's just a piece of metal. It's meaningless. It doesn't mean a thing. Well, if that's the case, then why do they manipulate gold and silver? If that's the case, why did someone dump 11,000 gold future contracts, around 1.5 billion notional, into the market, sending the price of gold tumbling? Why would they do that? Why would they manipulate the gold market in this way? And if you notice, every time they manipulate the gold market, the gold price doesn't stay down. It starts to creep up faster and faster each time they try to do this, which means they're losing control. And you can see that every time they do this, it gets worse and worse for them. They can't control the precious metals market anymore. They're losing control everywhere. Now, Trump is out there and he's continually tweeting out how great the economy is. And this is part of the plan. This is part of the narrative. He has to do this because he needs to stop the mainstream media. He needs to stop the central bank. He needs to stop the deep state. And he needs to box them in so there's nowhere for them to run. There's nothing they can do when we're approaching this 2020 election. Because usually they use the economy. Think back to Obama and McCain. When they were both running, what happened right before the elections? Well, Obama was talking about how bad the economy was, that we're not doing well, that we need to change things, that it might crash. And McCain was telling you how great the economy was, how strong it was, how fantastic everything is. And what happened? The economy fell apart. And McCain, he couldn't say a word about it. And Obama was right there on target. Now, was he really on target? No, it was set up. It was meant to be this way so he could win the election. That's why they did it. And Trump is stopping them at every turn because they can't use the economy against him. That's what they were going to try to use to get him out of office. Because, listen, they tried impeachment. They tried all these smear articles. They tried Russian collusion. They tried obstruction. They tried the manipulation of the 2016 election with the help of Russia. All that completely fell apart. And Trump is out there letting everyone know that we are rebuilding America. We're making it great again. And we're bringing back companies and manufacturing. This is what he tweeted out. The forgotten voters of the 2016 election are now doing great. The steel industry is rebuilding and expanding at a pace that it hasn't seen in decades. Our country has one of the best economies in many years, perhaps ever. Unemployment numbers best in 51 years. Wow. Now, we know that Trump is maneuvering to restructure the Fed. Q has been telling us about this. Right now, he's nominating Herman Cain, Stephen Moore. Stephen Moore is going through the vetting process. And Herman Cain, well, he's on the ledge right now, teetering back and forth, not knowing if he wants to go through with this. Now, remember, just because Trump nominates someone doesn't mean that this is going to be the person. A lot of times he throws these people out there to shake up everyone, to allow the person that he really wants to come into that position. And we see right now that there are other people that he's looking at. It's not just these individuals, but we will have to wait to see. Remember, Moore and Kane, they're gold bugs, and they're outside of the system. Actually, Moore has been calling and criticizing the Fed and calling to fire most of the central bank's officials. Kane, on the other hand, would like to introduce the gold standard. So you can see the thought process of Trump and where the patriots are going with all of this. Because what their plan is to take control, full control of the central bank system, and hopefully eventually audit it and get rid of it and make it a people system where we're creating currency without interest. Now, something very interesting. The ECB, they have slashed their growth forecast for 2019 from 1.7% to 1.1%. Now, the ECB is not the only central bank that does this. The IMF has been doing this, and we've seen this in the past. They come out with these numbers saying, oh, it's going to be 4%, 3%, it's going to be fantastic. And all of a sudden, we end up with, 1%, 0.9% around that area. Now, remember, Mario Draghi, he's been telling everyone that don't worry, in the second half of this year, we're going to see magic. All of a sudden, the economies are going to bounce back and everything is going to be fantastic. Well, guess what? The ECB's credibility is crumbling right now. There's individuals that are looking at this and they're saying, listen, we know that this is not going to happen. We know that the economy in the second half of the year is not going to magically improve. It's not going to happen. Now it appears that several of Draghi's fellow policy setters are starting to agree with critics who are questioning what Draghi is doing. Some policymakers went so far as to shoot what's left of the central bank's credibility in the foot or any other bodily organ and or appendage and questioned whether the ECB's projection models should be revisited. And Draghi, he is sticking to his guns. But a significant minority of rate setters in the last week policy meeting expressed doubt that a long projected growth recovery is coming in the second half of this year. And countries are now looking at this and saying, listen, this is not going to happen. The central bank has not improved our way of life. The central bank is not helping. And we can see already with Italy, where they're fighting to get their gold back, and many other countries out there saying, listen, we might follow suit. I mean, once the UK finally breaks away from the EU, you're going to see many other countries do this. Now, of course, the EU is going to do whatever they have to try to keep them. They're going to never let them go. They might even have events to try to show them that it's not a good time to separate from the EU. I mean, this is how far they will go, because the biggest fear is to have a country leave them and that country prosper. Because the rest of the country is going to say, wow, look how great they're doing. What are we still doing with the EU? This is the central banker's kryptonite. And gold is also. But if a central bank allows a country to leave their system and the country prospers, the rest of the world would notice. The rest of the world would see what is going on, and they'll start to say and question the central banks. Think about what Trump and the Patriots are doing. If Trump and the Patriots take over the Federal Reserve and they take full control over it where it's not a private Western central bank anymore, and the central bank is then audited, and the people take back control and they create their own currency, and the country does incredibly well without a private Western central bank, what do you think the rest of the world is going to do? You think the countries in the EU are going to say, you know something, we're going to stick with our central bank here, our private Western central bank, because they're really helping us out here? Or are they going to look to the United States and say, well, wait a minute, they just got rid of their central bank. The UK finally broke free of the EU. What are we still doing with the central bank system, the private Western central bank system? This would destroy the private Western central bank system in a snap of a finger. Why? Because confidence would be lost. Now, a lot of people say, well, no, that can't happen. You just can't get rid of the central bank. It's just not that easy. Well, yes, it is that easy. Think about, how was the central bank system brought online? How did we get it? Well, there was a law that was created. Of course, they faked it. The president signed it, and then we had the central bank. When we came off the gold standard, what did they do? They created something else, and they made up a story of why we needed to come off the gold standard and onto the petrodollar system. To get off of the private Western Central Bank, all we have to do is take control of what? One of the biggest central bank systems on the globe, the Federal Reserve, which feeds the other central banks. And if people see that we destroyed that central bank, others will follow. And this is the biggest fear of the private Western Central Bank system. And this is where we are headed. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.